Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here for this joint meeting of the Design Review Board, Covenants Committee, and the Reston Association of Board of Directors. This is a long-awaited meeting, so thanks everybody for being here. Tonight's meeting is rooted in a shared goal, strengthening alignment across our bodies as we guide the future of design and maintenance standards in Reston. Over the past year, as updated design guidelines or maintenance issues have come before each group, we've seen a few instances where interpretations and expectations have not fully aligned. These moments have highlighted opportunities to come together, to clarify our approach, and to ensure we are moving forward with a consistent vision. The objective this evening is straightforward: improve cohesion, transparency, and collaboration in how we create, revise, and interpret our design guidelines and maintenance standards. Our agenda this evening will focus on a few key areas. We'll start with introductions, then move into a discussion on the future of design guidelines, where there may be gaps, opportunities for improvement, and how we define the philosophy behind our standards. We'll also talk about how our committees can better collaborate on priorities, including use and maintenance standards, and how all of this ultimately impacts member experience and satisfaction. Finally, we'll look ahead to future projects and redevelopment in Reston, as well as opportunities to formalize ongoing collaboration, potentially through a joint working group or task force. By the end of tonight's discussion, this goal is to build a clearer, shared understanding of roles and responsibilities, find common ground on how we approach and interpret design guidelines, highlight a few key priority areas that may benefit from updates or added guidance, explore how we can collaborate more consistently moving forward, and identify some next steps. Together, these should help support more consistent and coordinated decision-making for each of our groups. Thanks again for your time and your commitment to Reston. All right.
Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Move that. I ask unanimous consent of the Board of Directors to adopt the agenda as published in our materials.
That is item C. That's item C.
Member comments.
Yes, that's item C. We have item B, member comments
Someone needs
first.
to do the agenda before we can take member comments. I think there's a misstatement here.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead. Without consent?
So I ask you.
Without objection?
So moved.
Okay, good.
Online? Okay, we're fine. Now we'll move on to member comments, item B. Brittany, it's going to take me a lot of time to not look that way, so I apologize in advance.
Is there anyone online this evening who would like to make a member comment? Please raise your hand or send us a message in the chat.
I don't see anyone. I'm going to take that as a no and move on to,
D.
yes, thank you. Item D, discussion, Board of Directors, Design Review Board and Covenants Committee.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent for the board to resolve itself and a committee of a whole to consider DRB and covenants matters.
Do we have a second? Did you say a motion?
I ask unanimous consent.
Is there any objection? I see none. Okay.
You need to appoint.
I know
yourself.
it. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Dr. Mullinex has said it's hard to hear. Can you hear better now?
Yes, thank you. I was just hard to hear some of the speakers.
Okay, thank you. And as it stands, I'm going to appoint myself chair of this committee of the whole. So we are going to move on to the first item here. So introductions. If we'd like to go around the table, that would be wonderful. We'd start over on my left-hand side. Next to Brittany, please. We're doing introductions. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us which committee you're part of.
Hi, my name is LaShonda Graham, and I am the Design Review Board Secretary.
My name is Gözde Tanieri. I'm a member of the DRB.
Hi, I'm Brian Cutler. I'm a member of the DRB.
My name is Michael Wood. I'm the chair of the DRB, been on the DRB for about 7, almost 8 years now. And these are actually all 3 of our architect members. So just to clarify that as well.
Great, thank you.
John Farrell, at-large board member.
Travis Johnson, president of the board.
Jalal Mapar, at-large member.
Margaret Perry, apartment owners representative.
Peter Lusk, acting CEO. Anthony Champ, general counsel.
Cam Adams, director of covenants administration. Karen Anton, Covenants Committee Vice Chair.
Richard Charnovich, Community Compliance Coordinator. I'm the liaison to the Covenants Committee and the Legal Committee.
And on to Zoom. Director Mullenix?
Hi, Matthew Mullenix, Board Member at Large and Treasurer.
Ms. Rao?
Greg McCallens, Covenants.
Ms. Rao? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a member of the Design Review Board, and I'm the 4th architect on the board.
Wonderful. Thank you. Director Cannon?
Georgina Cannon. I am the Lake Ann Tall Oaks Director and Board Secretary.
Thank you. Brittany, is there anyone else on that we can't see up here? Mr. Pegues? I don't see him.
Okay, there we go. Yes, William Pegues, Chair of the Covenants Committee. I'm also a member of Reston Planning and Zoning Committee and the Reston Association Environmental Advisory Committee.
I might ask you to do something else with your free time, sir.
Yeah, I sometimes take naps.
Fair enough. Moving on, Cam, I am going to turn some of this over to you because you're a man. So if you'd like to drive some of this, I would appreciate it.
Sure. I think we have one more Covenants Committee member,
Is
Erica.
there someone else on there?
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Erica.
My apologies.
No problem at all. I'm on the Covenants Committee, and I live in Golf Course View. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Awesome. So I guess we'll just go ahead and kick it off with the first thing on our agenda this evening is the future of the design guidelines, which is a wonderful, wonderful topic. I'm sure everyone is excited to talk about. So as you all know, there have been several applications and discussions related to concerns in relation to the interpretation of the design guidelines. The board has reviewed some of the design guidelines as we've kind of come in batches to you all from the design review board for you all to review and provide feedback and either send it back to the design review board or send it to, or approve it essentially. We have provided, I think, about 35 design guidelines in the last couple of years that the board has approved. And there's some standing design guidelines that I think that the board and the DRB should have discussion on, and they are in the package today. So that probably would be a great place to start with, leaving off from the board feedback that you all provided to the design review board, specifically on the design guidelines for lighting, decorative lighting for different types of properties within Reston Association, signage, play equipment, and I also believe shed and storage boxes was on the list as well. So I will kind of kick it back to anyone in particular that would like to kick us off with talking about the decorative lighting design guideline. In the package, you all have some of the feedback that the board has provided. And one of the things that I think, as we talk about design guidelines, is going to be whether or not the goal should be to make the process easier for the member, right? That's, I think, the one unified goal that the DRB and the board all have. And so when we talk about decorative lighting, we mean lights on poles in front yards. We mean lights in front of posts by the front door, by the garage doors. We also are talking about landscape lighting and what that should look like. And then talking about whether or not we should incorporate language into design guideline to require application or not for string lights. As you all know, string lights is typically your most popular type of lighting that's going to be placed on a property here in Reston. It's a very popular modification. And so maybe we should kick off with, do we all agree if properties within Reston should submit applications for string lights?
I'm going to pop in here quickly. This landscape light issue became a big deal with the board last year. There was a house by one of the lakes that was bright. We had some difficulty with the current guidelines because the guidelines just state that excessive. So we couldn't come to an agreement on what excessive meant. And if we couldn't come to an agreement, my perspective was the neighbors weren't necessarily coming up to an agreement. So, how could we better in the future refine the terminology so we're not using words like excessive and, we're landing on something a bit more concrete that we can move forward on and that's more easily actionable.
We can't hear you guys online.
Sean?
Can you hear this? Nope.
Same. I cannot hear the room.
Correct, same here.
Can you hear us now, Mike?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yep.
So I just went on the Shakespearean diatribe. I'm just going to, bring it
away
back
again.
in a very quick. I'm gone
Agreed.
again.
Went away again.
Sean's here.
Yeah, maybe it's just Brittany's mic. Can you hear me? Nope.
Can you all hear me?
I could hear that, yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
But you cannot hear me.
Let's try this.
We did that time.
Can you
Yeah,
hear
and
me?
we did.
They did hear me at that time. Okay. Yep. All right.
I think it might be helpful if everyone, just when you're talking, if you could speak directly into your mic.
I will swallow this mic. Okay.
The tip of the mic actually adjusts.
Okay.
Seems to have gone away again.
I'm doing my level best here. Can you? Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and until someone interrupts. I'll just summarize what I said earlier.
Maybe some problem
Nope,
with the
they can't hear
connection
me.
system.
Can you hear me?
May have to pause for technical difficulties.
Can you hear this? Can you hear us?
No.
So this one is dead too.
Yeah. Sean said there was some
Oh.
difficulty with this side of the room versus that side of the room because they're two different rooms and two different lines.
Oh, it is technically.
Yeah.
William, can you hear us? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
So
'Cause
it's
it's-
just us he can't hear.
You know
So
what?
it's further to the back of the room?
Yeah. I'm going to.
Please test again.
Sure. Give me 1 second.
In the meantime, I'm going to grab this one.
You want me to just give you mine?
I'm going to just.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me with this mic? Nope. Wow. It's just you, Brittany. They can only hear you.
I think we need to take a technical difficulty.
Test. Can you hear us? This is Cameron.
Yeah.
Cam, we can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I can hear you, Cameron.
There has to be something with the way it's being received.
What about me? Can you hear me?
Okay. Rather than do this, I'm going to suggest we adjourn not adjourn, excuse me, we take a break for about.
Travis, can you test your microphones right now?
I am talking into my microphone right now.
And folks abroad, can they hear us?
Okay.
I can hear that.
We're
I can hear
going to take a 15-minute break and then we'll come back. Brittany, can you let them know by text or just tell them because they can hear you?
Sure. We're going to take about a few minutes to break to address some technical difficulties.
We'll be back on at 7:05. Again, just to summarize what I was saying earlier, for the board, the light issue became a big deal last year when there was the issue at one of the lakes. Someone had a house that was very bright, and it caused some consternation amongst a few of the neighbors, and members of the board also had a long conversation about it that I think progressed across multiple weeks. So, what we're hoping to get out of this is some clarity moving forward and some, I guess, simpler language that will allow us to, not just with this issue where excessive was the problem, the word excessive was what stood out, but just moving forward, if we can have less vague language. And I see Mr. Pegues says his hand up.
Yes, I remember that last year we got in the Environmental Advisory Committee, we got a request related to the lighting. I know there is a sort of work group on this, but I don't know its status because I'm not part of that subgroup. But the EAC staff person, we have a list of items that we're all working on, so to speak, and he could probably let you know where the status is. And if it's not going anywhere, could certainly be started to go somewhere shortly. That's it.
Thank you. As I was suggesting, I didn't necessarily, mean just for this topic, but in general, I was hoping that we could add a little bit more clarity of language. I'm sorry, Mr. Copeland, were you? Oh, okay. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to the lighting topic? Director Farrell.
So I always think like a lawyer, and I apologize for that. But what comes to me on this issue is that it's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard to enforce a covenant that has a qualitative standard, as excessive being the example. But that's not the only example in the DRB, in the design review guidelines. And so to the extent that going forward, as we look at revising the design guidelines and as that package comes forward to us, to the extent that we can find objective measures like Kelvin, right, like foot candles, that helps with the enforcement. If we're asking legal to bring an action against someone for excessive lighting, quote unquote, if we have this, it's more likely we're going to get a favorable ruling out of a judge if we can point to a metric that is measurable. The other thing on lighting that I noticed in that case when I went and looked at the property in question is that the effect of those lights on the neighbors across the lake, because effectively the lake multiplies the lights. And it seems to me that when we're talking about that, the reflective quality or the reflective impact of exterior lighting adjacent to water bodies is something that we ought to be able to consider. Because if I just have a string of lights in my yard and it backs up to the 7-Eleven, who cares? But if I have a string of lights that backs up to the lake, that reflective quality off the lake is going to have a bigger impact on the neighbors on the other side of the lake. So I think when we're thinking about lighting, it's good to have measurement, and it's also good to think about reflection. Or, in most cases, we say lights need to be downcasting. But when we're dealing with something where the lights aren't downcasting, those elements need to be incorporated into our design guidelines so that it's enforceable. And that's my biggest concern when we have recommendation from legal is what is the judge going to say when we bring that complaint up in front of them?
Mr. Wood.
So my thing with that case, and that was a split decision at the DRB for when it was voted upon. I think the guideline, because we have this, no application needed if there's only 6 per face correct me, Cam, that is the current guideline. That's correct. And what we didn't have though is then we didn't have like maximum, because I agree that foot candles, Kelvin, all that can be called out, but like you said, enforcement is near impossible with lighting, because by all the county standards, that property was in compliance with foot candle, right? And so the issue is that I think we should just, if we want to be more, objective, we should have a maximum per face or a maximum per property light standard. If we want to control lighting, that's going to be the only way that's ever going to limit the amount of excessive glare or lighting. Because what that they argued that whole time was that our lights are all directed toward our property, and what it was creating was almost like a beacon of overall light. And technically the runoff was off their property line was low technically per these guidelines, like per these measurable things that they kept showing us. So my point is, but if we had a specific objective thing that said you cannot have more than if it's more than 6, you have to go to the board to get an approval, but you can't have any more than 12 per face or whatever it be.
So I think as some of the DRB members here know, I sat in on those meetings. And of course, I was very concerned about it for a multitude of reasons. I think there is a balance we can find that meets all of the requirements that limits that. But I also, I am very concerned in general that there have been some cases that are precedent setting, and that's a problem. Because once you've set a precedent, it's really hard to backtrack. And so I think, this meeting is long overdue, so I'm very grateful that you all are here tonight and that we're going to be working on this and moving through some things. But I think that, I feel like we're kind of getting to a point where someone comes to us and says, oh, we've already done the work and paid the money, and it's like, cool, here's your rubber stamp. Then there's no point for DRB, right? Like, if we're just rubber stamping stuff because people have already spent the money, that's a problem. So I think we need to look at all of our guidelines. I think they need to be subjective. I think they need to be, I don't want to make it so that our members are like, oh my God, I don't know what the rules are. Like, I don't want to go back to that point. But I do think we have to have guidelines that can easily be called out and said, this is what it is, and if you haven't met that, you either got to pull it or not put it in or whatever the case may be, because again, we're going to get to a point where DRB, there's no point, because people just do what they want to do, and then they come to the DRB after and go, oh, I spent the money, here's your rubber stamp. So I think as a whole, as RA, we need to be very careful about that.
May I ask, please? This is a question for you all on the DRB. From a design perspective, from the DRB perspective, have you thought about any, in addition to what has been redlined and commented and so on, are there any additional things based on this conversation that you think you can suggest, recommend, or is it all in here? For example, you mentioned maybe, you said maybe limited to 12 per phase, maybe do it this way. And I actually, follow what Director Farrell is saying, because we need to have some metrics. There's lumens, candles, whatever you've got. And those tend to be different with LED lights versus halogen and so on and so on. Is there anything else that we can think of, subject to, we want to make life easy for the members. We want to help them do the right thing. And I think we get into situations where sometimes, nothing's 100%. You get one case that just goes off the reservation, and that's what we have to deal with. Let's not make it so difficult so that we're targeting that one specific case, and we're forgetting the other 99% of the people who actually abide by your guideline, your recommendations, and so on. So there's a balance there. Just following up on Director Perry's comment as well. Anyway, over to you. Is there anything else with those in mind that you can recommend? Because we're not the experts.
So if I can say something about that, I'm new to DRB, and how hard it is, and I realize how hard it is actually to make these judgments, and it's not a rubber stamp overall. We do, look at the cases really deeply. Before us reviewing them, the staff reviews them and makes recommendations, and we sometimes overrule them and say, like, no, we don't agree with you. So it's not just a rubber stamp of whatever, whomever does whatever. So that I want to make it clear by objectively, I haven't been on the board for a long time, so I have no, precedent based on this had happened or that has happened, but I can see how hard the board, the DRB works on, not the standards, but like to guide everybody how to do things. And one of the things about this is lighting is very difficult to measure in the field. Unless you have lighting experts roaming around with a resident association car going around and measuring lighting, it's kind of like electromagnetic field is very difficult to measure. In certain areas it's more, certain areas it's less. Lighting is similar. And glare and reflectiveness in the pond areas is a problem, such as noise also. So how do you measure noise at that point? Like how loud someone talks, like you can talk in this caliber, but not in this decibel. That's very difficult to, have a complaint. I live by a pond where some neighbors talk loudly, the other ones sit all night until the morning and you can't hear them. So it's very subjective in that matter. But one of the things you can bring in my opinion, is if the glare is such an issue, first of all, like, dark sky lighting, so that's one. String lights are not dark sky, but you could enforce some dark sky kind of things in there. But if the houses are backing into a pool or a pond or some kind of reflectiveness, we could add it in our language saying, well, these houses need to be reviewed by the DRB so that there's a little bit of a buffer, and they kind of say, you know what, I don't want to put 1,000 lights in the backyard because I have to apply, get approved by the time I have to install them. It's kind of like a stop right there. And I agree with Mike and his comment about how many lights. You could just say, per face, but it is a matter of decision. At that point, if someone's 20 feet away from you in a pond, that's too much. And the other thing is, like, do you close your curtains? Maybe you should be a good neighbor and close your curtains. Maybe you should be a good neighbor and actually take other measures. So it's very difficult to measure lumens. It's very difficult. You have to have a lighting expert on staff going around, roaming around, and measuring everybody's light thing. Kelvin is not so. Kelvin is the color of light, and it's 2700. Okay, so it's soft, warm, whatever. You can say LED. You have to have that, and it needs to be not bright and dark sky, or it has to be what is that called? It pops up at night. So, not during the day or dusk or something. Dusk to dawn. So it could be something like that it doesn't come on. You can enforce those things, but somebody needs to enforce that. So is it the RB's problem at that point to go around and find someone, or staff's problem, or do you have a lighting measuring person? If there is a, law-abiding citizen that said, okay, I agree, I have complied with these, who measures that? Those are the questions there. And such as noise, same thing.
So, that's great thoughts and suggestions and ideas. And by the way, I want to make sure, like, it's not just lighting. There's signage. There's all sorts of things that I think we have to just be careful of. But back to Cam, you specifically asked about fairy lights. So, I would say, my personal opinion is fairy lights don't have to come before the board unless they're going to be up 24/7, 365, on all the time, never turning off. And I only say that because I know of one I can point you to directly right today. But if someone's putting up fairy lights because they're having a little gathering, or, they go off at a reasonable time, I don't know that we want to police that for every person to have to come before the DRB. But I do think there may be standards of if you're going to leave them up every day of the year, all year round, and you're gonna have them on every single night, and they can be seen because they're the big globe ones, I think that's an issue. And we need to figure out how to address that.
County standards are not our issue. We have a separate standards. We have, most of our design guidelines have nothing to do with the county zoning, have nothing to do with county ordinance. We're adopting standards that apply in this community. And when I talk about enforceability, I'm not asking the zoning administrator to come in and measure lights. They may have to do that under the zoning ordinance. But lighting is measurable. We have had lighting consultants before. We had lighting consultants when we put the lights up at Brown's Chapel 1. And we had a lighting plan. And when my clients are creating lights in a parking lot, there are lots of consultants in the neighborhood who can measure the lights for you and give you a prediction of what the candle's going to be. So the ability to measure and the ability to know what level of lighting you have is knowable. They're all around. We could hire one if the case came up. So I don't think the inability to measure is a reason not to regulate with something other than the vague subjective references like warm or excessive. If our general counsel, through outside counsel, would try to get an enforcement action with that language, we would lose because it's subjective. We need to have standards that are independently verifiable. I'm not comfortable with the idea of just saying, well, you can have this many lights on this facade because it doesn't tell me how bright the lights are. It doesn't tell me what kind of light. Is it a blue light? Because that, is the one that's most intrusive versus a red or redder or orange light, which is less intrusive. But those metrics can be measured. We know that. So I think I would look to CAM and my friends in the architecture industry and try and look to see whether or not there isn't some kind of, and maybe we need to consult with one of the lighting experts that are in practice in the area to get them to give us some standards on foot candles or the like. So it's not, to me, it is measurable. I measure it in my practice, and my clients measure it in their practice. So it's not something we can't get our arms around. I think we need to do it because otherwise, I don't know how we bring an enforcement action in the courts.
If I may just have one line to what Director Farrell said. Personally, and completely understand, I'm a recovering engineer, by the way, so I know what you're talking about. When you talk about the number of, yes, when you talk about the number of lights, to me it sounds like a bit subjective. How do you come up with that? What's the rationale? What's driving that? Why couldn't it be 10? Why couldn't it be 20? Why couldn't it be 1? Just adding on top of what Director Farrell said, it's just difficult for me to comprehend the rationale for specifying a number. I mean, you take the total square foot or lumens, and you say, based on this, you can only have it. We're making it difficult. It seems like we're making it a bit complicated. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I would say, I wasn't trying to say we would remove all the other language of the color temperature and of the Kelvin. It would just be, the thing is, we're trying, and I'm hearing, we want to make it easier for our members.
Yeah.
And telling them, hey, you can't exceed 5-foot candles at the perimeter of your property. As subjective as that would be, they would have no clue what that means.
Yeah.
And so my struggle with that is, it's also like why the string lights guideline. I was saying, let's limit it to 50 feet. And if anything over 50 feet, it can't really get that bright at 50 feet. There's a bulb every foot. We were trying to basically make it as easy as possible for the members before we had to then enforce a complaint. The one that we talked about, they had a very detailed lighting expert. He talked for an hour about how his foot candles would not be objectively affecting the surrounding houses. None of the neighbors came out and argued it and said that it was bright. I went and visited the site multiple times. Of course it was bright. It was, you know, it was bright. But the problem was that all the experts said it wouldn't be. You know, it's not going to affect anybody else. It's lower than the foot candle maximums, et cetera, et cetera. And so luckily we had that one, you know, installed so we could, or luckily or unluckily, it was installed so we could see it. And so my problem is, to me, if in our case we had a guideline that said you cannot have, if you go over 6 and you can't have more than 12 per face, we could have easily denied that application, black and white.
Yeah.
Whereas if we don't have a maximum, then somebody like that can bring in every expert they want and argue it, and then it convinced half of our board to pass it.
Well, yeah, I also want to, lighting is measurable by lighting experts, not by pedestrians and public and I own a home, if I put up lights, there's no way for me to actually come up with it. Like, I agree with Mike, on that aspect. They have no idea. Public will not have an idea. Experts in a church parking lot, yes, we do use lighting consultants, and there are consultants and those kinds of buildings. As architects, we've done this so many times. Interior spaces, that's always done. And all that, but outside, reflectiveness, when that comes into effect, or dusk to dawn, or that kind of stuff, how close my house is to your house, what is the face, how much glass I have in my house, those are all reflective and effective parts of how bright I see that light, in respect of the environment. So quantifying that Kelvin, color of light Kelvin, is easy, 2700, that's fine. And I agree with Mike, limiting the number in a foot candle, you could say foot candles per 50 feet, this is gonna be this much many, 50.
Mr. Pegas.
Yes, a little coordination here with the EAC again is that some years ago, we were actually doing a survey about lighting requirements in general. And one of the members of the committee at that time, I don't know whether she's still a member or I don't think she is. I think her limitation time, she was off. She was actually a lighting consultant. Now, we can try to go back to our membership in the past and determine who that person is. They were also a Reston resident, which was interesting. So we may be able to recruit someone here internally that is a professional lighting expert. Just thought I'd bring that up. Staff on the committee side should be able to come up with the past memberships and who this person was.
2,400 households.
Does he have his hand up or?
He's just spoke.
Oh, is he? Oh, okay, I'm just seeing it twice.
It's two images.
I see, okay. I just wanted to say, I agree with Mike. I mean, that expert spoke a long time, that expert spoke in circles, that expert had a lot of information. But the other issues that we need to also point out and write into our guidelines, they had uplighting, which had not been previously allowed and somehow was allowed here because, oh, well, it'll be okay under the candle, blah, blah, blah. So I think, it's those kinds of things we need to not necessarily create guidelines only because of that case, but we can use that case to guide us into what things we need to look at, we need to be aware of. And, the reality is, the other thing that was a concern there was, their big thing was, this is for security. And therefore, we should be allowed to do whatever we want because it's for security. And so I think we have to be cautious of that too. Recognizing, I think that there was the conversation at one of those DRB meetings, if not more than one, about, the neighbor down the lake that had a motion censored light that shone out on the lake, for security. But the argument from the DRB was it's motion censored. It comes on, it goes off. Versus their lighting, which was going to be on originally all night long. The DRB, I believe, did tell them they had to put in some kind of limit on timing at least. So those are the types of things that I think we should use as guidelines for how to move forward for lighting in general. And we need to look at fairy lights. You know, the DRB has some recommendations. 50 feet seems long, but then it doesn't seem long. It kind of depends. But we also need to include security lighting, and we need to include the landscape lighting. Thank you. And I don't think that we're going to come to a consensus tonight, but I think that as a general rule of thumb, we should be thinking of these things, coming up with ideas for how to be able to move forward, to give our members some very front-facing, here's your guidance, it's either this or that, right? You either fall under these guidelines or you go to DRB. And then, if they've already put it in and they're coming to DRB after the fact, we need to have something in place. Because we cannot continue to go, well, it's already done. And that's not necessarily DRB's problem or fault. People do it all the time, and we know that. We know how many people take down trees in Reston without permission.
Yeah.
How many, houses get painted the wrong color gray. So I just think that, I think we have some great guidance for what we need to move forward with lighting, recognizing it's not going to be solved here tonight.
Speaking of not going to be solved here tonight, I don't want to get wrapped around the axle of lighting,
Right.
because this particular topic was intended to be broad. And I wanted to discuss things like the shed and storage boxes on docks. That has been also an issue for the board. And what else? Political signs have also been an issue. How long are we allowed to keep them? What kind are we allowed to put out? Things along those lines. So we're looking to you all for some specificity. As the president of the board, I also serve as the chair of the legal committee, and these types of things come before the legal committee on a regular basis. And I would like to make sure that we have some guidelines that are clear and that take into account the day-to-day lives of the folks who are live under our covenants.
Can I chime in
Please.
on that front? Because I think that that's a good segue into where does the association want to go in terms of guidelines versus standards. So when we hear about guidelines, they're exactly that. They are meant to be a framework of what you can do, not explicitly prescribe what you can do. And I think our membership is looking for the association to have a perspective on tell me what I can do. Make it very simple for me to go to Home Depot and buy the light, buy the whatever, go to Amazon, buy whatever I need to do, install it, and have no problems with the association. And so how do we do that? Do we prescribe explicitly what we want them to do and establish and move into a direction of having community standards? And community standards are not the same thing as cluster standards. I want to make sure that we bifurcate those things. Community standards are going to prescribe to the member what is allowed and what's not allowed. The way that the RA guidelines are written right now, it's essentially saying if you do X, no application. If you do anything beyond X, it goes to a consultation or a panel level. And then if that doesn't fit your parameters of your project and your framework, then it has to go to the full DRB, which, as we all have seen, means this basically you can ask for anything that you want, and it's going to be subjectively reviewed because the DRB doesn't have anything that explicitly prohibits anything except for white stone and red mulch and round stones. Those are the only three things that are explicitly prohibited in Reston Association.
Which still happen.
Which still yes.
Well, and we only allow 3 types of fences, right?
I think extremely objective.
So I think that would be a good place to kind of like have a discussion in terms of like, is the association wanting to move into a direction of being more prescriptive in what we want members to follow in terms of.
Back at you, if I may. We all care about serving the members. Okay. I think the way you described this was really good. Guidelines are sort of like, this is the guideline. Standard is not the same as guideline. What do you like that model right now? From your perspective, where you said, do you think that's a good model for RA?
I do, because right now what we see often is that unfortunately members are just going to do what they want to do and deal with it when they sell their homes.
100%.
So may I just add that in my experience, I'm talking about the majority of the members, first of all, follow the guidelines, and if they don't know, they ask. But even if they make mistakes, they don't do it intentionally. Is that your experience?
No.
No.
I said the majority of people.
No. Yeah.
So I stand corrected, then maybe we've got some bad.
Yeah. And there's no. I don't want to put consequence because everyone owns their home and they should be encouraged to update the exterior of their homes, but the association does not have the ability to charge for homeowners who do after-the-fact modifications, right? That's prescribed in the deed. And so if I remove a tree, there's no real consequence if I didn't submit an application other than the DRB coming in and saying, well, you've got to replace the tree because you took it down. And 9 times out of 10, we don't know about it unless the member complains or the home is being sold and we've gone through our repository of all the documents and confirmed that the tree was removed.
Actually,
McCandless.
Mr. McCandless. I see you've got your hand up, sir.
Hey, yes, I was, are we on back to the lighting? I agree with Margaret, we're not going to be able to address this fully tonight, but there were some 3 type things that I didn't hear anyone mention. One of them, the most important one, is following 5109 of the Fairfax County Code. So you can just basically go off the code that's already in place by Fairfax County. The other one is that most HOAs nationwide now are using Dark Sky International, their guidance on this lighting issue as well. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is the one that probably can work pretty well, is they actually have a light meter that you can go to your property line and use that meter. And if that meter picks up a certain, whatever the board would use as a threshold, then you could say that you have what's called light trespass. So those are just the 3 things that I wanted to say. The Fairfax County Code that's already in place, Dark Sky International, I emailed Tony just now during the call, and then the 3rd one just being an actual meter that will say, hey, your light is trespassing on my property line, and that this isn't a subjective issue where people are just saying, oh, I don't like that bright light, that you actually have like an actual enforcement grade where you say, hey, my meter says it's over 200. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Cam, were you still?
No, so I think, hearing the perspective of those that are in the room about moving in a direction of being more prescriptive in what the association is going to give guidance to the member that says, yes, you can do this, yes, you can do this. And we're looking at more so in single-family detached homes, right? Because cluster associations have their own cluster standards, they have their own prescription in what's allowed, generally speaking. So really you're talking about single-family homes and your non-residential projects that you may want to have more guideline-esque type discussions versus your single-family detached homes.
If I may. So this is a conversation Peter and I have had, and to stay away a little from our members at the moment, let's look at RA, right? So RA owns the lights over at Lake Ann. those big, beautiful bulbs that are glass all the way around. So when you're looking down, all you see is light. And, you know, it's a conversation he and I have had about as those need to be updated, right? We're not talking about tomorrow. We're not looking at spending that money immediately. But as those need to be updated, let's look at replacing them with ones that are better fit for dark skies, which, by the way, should be, and I believe to some extent is the standard we do try to strive by. And therefore, if we're asking that of our members, then we will hopefully continue to try and do better ourselves as RA. And I think we ask that in general of apartment owners, right? When apartment owners are coming in and replacing their lights, that, you know, they have to meet certain requirements to help protect those dark skies. So I think there's a lot we can do. As far as the, you know, prescriptive for our residents, our members, I think by having not strict guidelines in, you must use gray from William Sherwin, whatever they're called.
Sherwin.
Thank you. That, you know, was outdated 10 years ago, right? Like that's the only gray you can use is the one that they don't make anymore. Like I don't think we should go that far. But I do think we should go into, look, if it meets X, Y, and Z, you're golden, move on, life is good. If it A, B, and C, let's have a conversation. And then if it still doesn't fit into that box, cool, let's take it to DRB. Whether it's a fast track through the panel or it's the whole DRB board. But I think if we do better about providing some parameters, it will ultimately make everyone's lives easier. And again, I'm not looking for they must use this light pole, you know, that may go out of style in 2 years. But let's try and get to a place where we've got stuff that people can look at and go, cool, I fit that bucket, let's move on. And I think we do it now some, but I think we can do better.
Mr. Peggins.
Yes, as regarding paints, just for item curiosity, since that was one of my professional specialties, is that no matter what the color of the paint is, if you know the name of it, no matter how old it is, they can reconstruct the formula even from a different manufacturer. Or you can even take them a paint chip from something and they will come up with an exact match. You can't tell the difference. Just wanted to bring that up.
I go back from history. My neighbor got pinged many, many years ago prior to CAM because they painted their house the wrong gray. And when they were required to repaint it, none of us could tell the difference. But all of a sudden, they were okay because they paid to repaint their house a different gray. So that's why I bring up the paint. But the other question I have is, what would help covenants? We've talked a lot about DRB, we've talked a lot about RA hopes and goals and all, but what would help covenants with being able to make this better and easier for our members, easier for you guys?
And on top of that, and just for my awareness, how many applications do you process per year? Do you have a sense for that?
Close to 2,000.
2,000 per year. And how many of those they go the wrong way?
The association approves about
Percentage
96% of the applications.
Okay, so about 4% that just are problematic.
They're either withdrawn or disapproved.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
If someone can answer Director Perry's question.
Well, yeah, of course, covenants doesn't deal with design issues, but just, I think it's the same issue, though, is more specificity in the resolutions. And if we get to it, we're going to address some of that tonight, but, you know, things like excessive and attractive and blah, blah, that doesn't tell people anything.
Right.
So that's what I would recommend, that we continue, excuse me, that we continue to work on tightening up the resolutions and getting more specific about some things that should lead to fewer issues that we have to rule on.
Selfishly, I'm going to think about this from the board standpoint. How can we help all of you, make guidelines that are more consistent and more objective and help you, enforce these rules in a more objective way? And when I say that, one of the things that stands out to me is, as an example, this is a personal example, is the inconsistency in how we enforce rules from owners, not owners, excuse me, from complaints versus purchase order complaints. In my experience, Covenants doesn't do checks on properties that have been, who have violations based on a purchase, but they will follow up, and we've discussed this before, they will follow up based on violations that come from complaints.
That is, so we do have a staff member here that is responsible for post POA inspections. So we do check post resale violations. The time frame is a larger window than a complaint because we're required to follow up on the complaint in the structured time set up. We have a little bit more flexibility from a resale perspective in terms of those rechecks, but we do return to properties for checking compliance with POAs that have been issued.
Right.
We do.
That happened, I'm sorry.
Is that upon notice from the owner that the issue has been resolved, or is that within a certain time frame?
So generally our process is if a property sells, that is what triggers when they communicate that the property has sold. We've received the title paperwork and et cetera and the check. That then gets notified to the team member to then issue an intent to inspect letter. So any inspection we conduct, we have to give at least 14 days notice before we can do any inspection. So we send an intent to inspect letter and it gets put into the queue. So like, for example, right now, and Sandra's on the call, so she may have more of a specific answer, but we're doing resale checks from Q2 or Q3 of 2025 right now. So it's not necessarily immediate, but we do go back and check depending on whether or not the home is being flipped. So generally if the home is being flipped twice, it's more quickly that we're going to recognize it because they're asking for another update on their resale disclosure package.
Right. Speaking as president of a cluster, when the seller asks for the disclosure package, the staff comes out and checks it out and lists the deficiency, and that's considered between the buyer and the seller as to how that's going to get resolved, right? And so in the course of the sale process, the staff has identified deficiencies, okay? And then the buyer and the seller are going to negotiate how they get resolved. Sometimes the buyer says, I'm not closing until you fix it. Sometimes the seller will say, I'll give you credit and you go fix it. Sometimes it's a postponement, and sometimes there's a credit on the settlement sheet for the buyer to go fix it. And that's the enforcement exercise. But the buyer and the seller both know if there are any deficiencies, and the cluster, and just a reminder, clusters, townhouses clusters, they are 9,000 out of our 23,000 homes. So that is going to happen in that process. And I have to deal with it, and I've dealt with Pam on a couple of occasions where about, I'd say 20% of our homeowners resent the hell out of their being CCRs at all. And so they, the hell with you, I'm gonna go do what why can't I do what I want? And that's not a small number. So, I mean, that's how we wind up sometimes getting in front of covenants is, there was a pre-closing inspection as part of the disclosure package, a deficiency was found, and it hasn't been cleaned up.
Right, I'm talking about a slightly different situation in which the property is purchased as an as-is, so they've bought all of those violations in back. But I'm not going to get right around the axle. I'm going to let other people talk and not talk about my own issue. Mr. Pegues, you've got your hand up.
On the issue of language in itself, my background in architecture was 40 years as a technical specifications writer for slightly more than 400 architectural projects around the country, 20 of which are here in Reston itself. My task was to write contract documents for literally everything from below the grade to the top of the roof and anything sitting on it. Language is required to be very specific. We can't put in, okay, it needs to look good, or don't do this. You have to be very specific. So I was just listing to say that any work group that wants to be established, I would be very willing to lend my experience in doing this review. Actually, some of the gutters and downspout design review guides that was published were republished a few years ago. I rewrote all of those for very definitive language. Not all of them. I think I may have missed the condos one. I'm not sure.
Thank you, sir.
So feel free to keep track of my name.
Again,
it'll keep me from taking any more naps.
your copious nap time.
Can we jump to play equipment for a moment? Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, that's still part of the same topic. Yeah.
Excellent. I know we've had some discussions amongst play equipment. I'm fully on board with, they have to get the little form, they have to have their neighbors sign off on it. I guess where I differ from maybe some here is, I think we go too far with what we require of play equipment in people's own backyards. If your neighbors have agreed to it, I don't think anyone should be forced to create a site plan and, it's going to go right here and never move type of a thing. So I guess what I'm looking for is, this specifically talks about forts and swing sets. Are there thoughts from DRB, thoughts from covenants on, where you think we should be heading with play equipment? My personal opinion is we go too far. I think we don't need it to go as far as it does currently.
And I'll support that position from, I believe this was a case came up when we were in England.
Yeah.
Obviously, I won't go into specifics of that.
Correct.
But there was a piece of play equipment that, was well within property line, and the neighbors had issues with it. And I don't want to arm people with the possibility of complaining about their neighbors over something that's within their own property line. If somebody's going to get hurt on that equipment, that's on their homeowner's insurance, not on ours. So, I'd I'd love to get your feedback on how we adjust our guidelines / standards to, be more reflective of personal property owners.
I think from our perspective, from staff, we're looking for those exact types of instances that are escalating to whether it's legal or covenants or whatever the case may be. Looking for the board to tell the DRB, we really think that you all should consider and contemplate these things as you all start to talk about your design guidelines. It's contemplated that the design guidelines are reviewed every 5 years. As we know, we've been a little bit behind the 8 ball on that part, but I think we're moving in the direction of having those design guidelines reviewed. But to your point, Director Perry, the 2 design guidelines related to play equipment, 2018 was the last revision.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I think the association itself is moving in a direction of wanting to have and encourage members to have more freedom. Our design guideline doesn't really contemplate the fact that, like, well, okay, who's measuring that their yard is 60 feet wide to be able to put it smack dab in the middle of their yard and have 20 feet on both sides? I don't think we're in that mode anymore. And so how do we make sure that the DRB has that information so that they're considering the input from the board as they're discussing these design guidelines, and staff can continue to add things to our list, that when we're doing that every 5-year check, we're having this conversation, that out of that conversation comes, okay, now we've got our list of priorities for the next X. That's our goal.
I'm all for that.
So I'm not sure I remember a case that's come forward about play equipment.
It never did because they didn't comply, which is why they read it.
I'm saying in general, I don't remember.
So I can tell you, it was probably before your time. It would have been 10 or 12 years ago. I was putting a trampoline in the backyard for my children. My neighbors were okay with it. My landlady brought it to the DRB because that's the current flow. And the DRB said, sorry, your drawn picture isn't good enough. And we had to go get someone to actually pull out, the plot from the county and measure it, and here's where they're gonna put it, and we had to pay someone to do that. I shouldn't have to pay, no RA member should have to pay someone to submit an application for a trampoline. So I think it was prior to your time, I believe even like maybe on the edge of Mike's time. But that's where I think we fall short and we need to do better in that, and maybe we are. But I think
I'd argue that you've asked us to have, like, to me, there's a clear guideline that says where it can go.
Sure.
And that was exactly what you guys were arguing about the lighting, and now you're having the opposite argument saying, well, now our guideline is too strict, and everybody should be able to do what they want with their property. And so it's like, you can't tell us both things, because our guidelines, and where we're strict about that is that's the no application required.
Right.
Then there's the next step, which allows us to be objective with our decision making and say, okay, that is okay. It sounds like it never even made it to the DRB, and in that case, it just went straight to legal. I don't know why, but we can't hear both. We can't be told both things and then say, okay, we'll go update your guidelines, and then you guys are saying two sides of the coin. That's confusing to us. At least it's confusing to me.
Sure.
Director Farrell, do you have something you want to add?
Not on this.
Okay.
I guess my thought process is on certain play equipment, it doesn't even necessarily need to get to you. That's what I'm saying.
I would argue that there's probably, 150 trampolines that are in Reston that have never come before us.
I agree.
And I think, frankly, that's probably okay.
Mhm.
I
would 100% agree.
Unfortunately, it only comes to us when if you have somebody who complains, it then becomes an issue, and that's ultimately going to be.
Or a landlady who's very strict on safety.
Maybe, correct. Yes, exactly. One could argue a trampoline's not even a play equipment. They could argue it's an exercise.
Right.
Right.
So that's right. No. I think that's where my point is like, I think with some of these things, we can change what buckets it's in, right? Like, I'm not asking you to change the guidelines for, it's got to be X feet, blah blah blah. I'm looking at, can we consider changing? If your neighbors agree to the play equipment, staff can go check and we're done. You see what I'm saying? So that's where I'm going with that one. But I do understand your point of view of, we either need to have guidelines or we need to have standards or we don't. And I understand that too.
And I think Cam's point about the guidelines versus standards is, I would say, and I would say our no application section of our guidelines is kind of our standards. Like, if you meet that, it's not a standard, but it's like that's what is supposed to be easy for the member.
Correct.
If you want to be easy and you don't want to fight, like, there's people who could put up fences and not go through all the battles that they do if they just followed our simple guidelines that said, You need to set within 8 feet of the property line. If you're boarding any neighbor, just go 8 feet within the line, you could put up the fence. But then there's the people who argue and say, I want to put up the fence right on the shared property line. Their neighbor doesn't agree, and we go into a 5-meeting process to be like, if you move this, you're on an acre lot, you move this 8 feet. You could just put up the fence. But there's people who will go to battle for that 8 feet. And so, there's unfortunately we're going to run into those circumstances. So that's the only reason why we do have quote unquote standards. At least that's how I would consider them for the no application. And I think what you're wanting us to do is try to evolve and maybe bucket some more items into that to hopefully clearly help our members, do a little bit more things. And we don't want to see every case. I don't want to burn new trampolines. I'm a licensed architect. I don't care less about a trampoline. But that's just,
Yeah, we want to see those fun STEAM projects from South Lakes High School. Those are cool.
I think Michael makes a good point. I would just note, it's one of those things that I think the board and the DRB have to contemplate how much member time is spent submitting an application and how much you're paying staff to review these applications.
That's why I asked about it.
And that's a significant amount of time that we're required to follow a set procedure to make sure that that application is complete. And when we talk about prescribing specific things, we're talking, okay, well, if the homeowner wants, I'm just giving an example, if a homeowner wants a patio that extends 15 feet from the rear of their home, it requires an application. 14 feet, no application. So there are opportunities that we can try to reduce the amount of time that staff is spending processing these applications, and maybe they have more time to get into the more meaty things that the association really wants us to drive. And so there does need to be that balance of, okay, yeah, we do need to try to prescribe certain things that are allowed, and maybe that's opening up the no application category. I don't know what that looks like. I can give some recommendations, most certainly, but ultimately the DRB and the board own that, right? And so what are we hearing from members and what do the members want ultimately is really going to drive, I think, what we as an association are going to end up doing as a final product when it comes to that philosophical guideline standards, cluster standards. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
This is Director Mullenix. Let me jump in.
Please.
I'd just like to echo everything that Cam just said. I think that there's certain dials that we should consider as a board as we're setting, overall arching policy, and we should get the input from Cam and the DRB about what those dials are and how we can set those dials. To exactly the point, if there is a perception that there is too much in the way of bureaucracy, in the way of extraneous review, let's figure out how we can dial that back to focus on the most important elements. I'd be very interested in staff's opinion on those things. I'd be very interested in the DRB's and the DRB's opinion on those dials. I don't think it's for the board to fully understand all of the elements of the of the DRB book, but certainly understanding from staff and from the DRB what those dials are so that we can find the right mix. So thank you.
All right.
Do we want to pivot to our next section, or are we still on?
No, I think we've we beat this one.
Are we not going to talk about the two issues on the page?
You're
10 and 11?
The dots, the boxes.
The boxes and
political
the
signs.
political signs, we're not going to talk about
We
that?
can.
I just was trying to figure out what the agenda is.
We absolutely can.
I don't have a real strong opinion on boxes, but I am concerned about political signs. And I'm really focused on as the materials distinguish between election-related signs and signs about casinos and golf courses, as an example. We have those all over the place. Right now, the guideline, I think, is, Cam, helping, it's 30 days before the election?
Yes.
Okay. The problem with that is that we can start voting 45 days before elections. on the national and state and local.
If it doesn't change.
And for now, and it seems to me we need to be able to let people express their political preferences before voting starts. So I would strongly recommend that we change that to 60 days before an election. And if you want to take them down 10 days after the election, I'm fine with that. Most campaigns, at least campaigns I'm associated with, tell their volunteers to pull up the sign the next day. Some campaigns put thank you notes on their signs out for a week or so afterwards. But at any rate, I don't know what to do with the issue signs. I don't have an answer. I don't know. You know, save the golf course, open space, it's forever. I don't want to send staff out to pull those signs down. And are they political signs? Yeah, the broadest definition. So I don't know what to do about that, so I don't have a sense on sheds.
Could I make just an addition to
Go
your
ahead.
political? So just to add a complication to the political signs, there's also the signs that just have, you know, generic sentiments. I support federal workers, or in this house we love blah blah blah.
Well,
You know,
yeah, I'm
so-
talking about issue signs, yes, I
So,
meant
so-
logos.
Yeah, so any of those, you know, so I guess my question is, what's the intent of the rules that we have? Are we trying to make you know, our neighborhoods more fair places for political discussion? You know, that to me is where the calendar comes in, as far as like the election signs. Or are we trying to discuss the aesthetics, where we don't want to have a bunch of cardboard signs sitting in front of houses? So, you know, I think that the intent of the rule would probably define the calendar dates as well. Because if this is to discuss aesthetics, then it really doesn't matter, you know, when you put out your election signs. And if it's about elections, well, why are we in that business? You know?
Well, you know, it's a catch. You know, let's use the golf course as the example, right? Because the golf course issue, unfortunately, for both north and south, rears its ugly head every
6 months?
9 to 18 months, right? And so I think, you know, when we're looking at that, are we telling people like you can't have your support for keeping the green space out there when we as residents say we support the green space? You know, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that needs to be part of whatever discussion we're looking at, because I don't necessarily, while I agree they are politically sideways, right? Like, we don't know, like, you don't always know when that ugly snake is gonna rear its head again. South golf course is currently on the chopping block again at the moment, right? So, and then as soon as it's done, north will raise its ugly head. And I think that we have to be careful to tell people like, no, you can't show that you support these things.
And I think that's where where I was going when I was talking about the intent.
Right.
You know, why do we have the rule?
So I think there's a simple answer to that one. The motivation for this is I've interacted with people who want, you know, a total ban on signs, is that it's considered clutter, and that they don't like politics. And so they don't want to be reminded of politics.
They'll be reminded when they have no golf course.
Well, hang on. I'm talking.
Every time, please, for the
I'm talking about elections.
Okay. Oh, the election ones. Okay.
Election signs. I mean, there are occasions when those election signs are up at Christmas still. And I get that. I would think that we should feel free to have a rule that says, hey, get them down 10 days after the election. Okay? I don't have a problem with that. And there is, you know, not that we're subject to the First Amendment, but there is a First Amendment kind of consideration on election signs. on that kind of political sign. I don't know the answer on the other non-election political signs, because the clutter issue is there. But I don't ever get a lot of complaints, Cam, helping out. As cluster president, I don't get any complaints about the Black Lives Matter sign, or the preserve the golf course sign, or the no casino sign. I'm not getting those complaints from my cluster. Now, I'm on a cul-de-sac, so, you know, not getting a lot of traffic that would induce people to put up those kind of signs. So I don't know that we need to regulate those. But getting the election sign down after the election, I have no problem with them getting them down and saying, get them down, you're done.
Yeah, I think to President Johnson's perspective, what's the intent? If you don't prescribe what a political sign is, what an election sign is, which our guideline does not, then it's open the floodgates to whoever's interpretation it is at the point in time that they see it. So some people may say Black Lives Matter is a political sign, right? And so there's prescribed requirements for political signs. And so if we get a complaint about it, which we do get, doesn't necessarily mean put that language that specifically reference, but we get complaints all the time. And so how do you then make sure that you're properly escalating and properly moving the violation or alleged violation through its process? And so making sure that we're defining what we're talking about makes it very clear to the member what they can expect when they talk about signs.
So we just need the definition of what a political campaign sign is.
Maybe we have to add a section, because we have political signs and then like real estate signs. It has a kind of a different guideline. So it's something maybe we want us to expand.
Well, you already have, the real estate sign's already in the guidelines.
Yes, so like we need to expand some more generic category to
Or
include.
maybe we don't. If we define what political campaign sign is, and then the others aren't acceptable.
Everything else is other.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you know, look, my neighborhood, it's a lot of, we support federal workers and things like that, and then, you know, there's the, we love all people in my, you know, in my yard, and I would guarantee my neighbors probably, but nobody's ever complained. But I would think if it doesn't fall under political election campaign material, then you're probably safe.
Cam, you mentioned you get a lot of complaints. What's the nature of the complaints?
It depends. I mean, some of it is very frivolous. I don't like my neighbor, and like the design guideline right now says that you actually have to submit an application for a real estate sign. So, yes.
We need to
Which
remove
does not
that.
happen. No one does it.
Yeah, I was just saying, we gotta remove that.
And so it's one of those things that it's there, and so if we got a complaint, we'd have to actually tell the homeowner, you need to submit an application, so you've got to go to 3 neighbors and get them to sign it and submit the application. And so that's one of the things that we recommended to be removed. But to your other point about, you know, what kind of
What's the
complaints.
objection generally?
I don't like the message.
You don't like the message.
And
It's not clutter aesthetics, if they don't like the message.
we've gotten complaints when they've gotten like more than 2 signs. Like people will throw all kinds of signs in their front yards, and that does come up. The number comes up often, but the number is what triggers an application. So more than 2 requires an application.
Okay.
If somebody else doesn't have anything, I wanted to go on to the conversation on page 36 of the material. Please do. All right, hold on.
I was just gonna ask one question. Do storage boxes are separate from sheds?
Yes, they are.
They're just like the boxes that I put my deck pillows in, type of a thing?
Yes. And the comments we received were specific to single-family detached, and I don't want to speak for the DRB, they're here tonight, but I think the comments from the board were well received.
Okay.
Dr. Crowley, you wanted to discuss environmental impact considerations.
Well, I'm not quite sure really is environmental impact, but if we're talking about imposing expense on the applicant, because when I think about observing all the membership, I'm serving the applicant and the neighbors, right? So, because they're both members, right? But when I look at a suggestion that we try and regulate lot coverage and try and regulate impervious surface area and trying to regulate limits of disturbance, all of that is regulated by the county in the grading plan process. And the county has very specific standards, 2,500 square feet of disturbance, and it's not just turning the soil over, it's where you park the bobcat and where you pile the lumber, that goes toward the 2,500 square feet. So this is highly and intensely regulated by the county. Someone's gonna have to explain to me what would we try to achieve over and above what the county does, because the county is doing this for stormwater control. And I'm not interested in doing this. It's duplicative of the county, and if we're gonna go through this, then we're gonna have a standard that's more intense than the county. And
Which sometimes we do.
understood, like lighting, right? But my point is, if we're gonna have standards that are more intense than the county, why? And what are they? Not just, hey, we ought to go regulate this. I think the county does, until somebody points out to me that the county doesn't do a good job of this, and somehow it's harming our community by the means in which they regulate these three items. The cost of this, you have to hire a civil engineer to do these calculations. And I'm told the last number this afternoon, I got a quote of $17,000 to do a grading plan. And that's how you get this information. You do a grading plan.
I can assure you there is no member that has submitted a grading plan to Reston, and they have been required to do so. They paid $17,000 to do it. And if you are, you're getting robbed. But this came up for precisely the reason that you mentioned, which is that the permitting requirement is the 2,500 square feet. So anything below that, there is no kind of guidance that the DRB has in terms of objectively reviewing a redevelopment of a property or a entire infill of a property, that 9 times out of 10, it's the members who live in that vicinity that are more concerned about it than the homeowner that's submitting the application. And so how can the DRB objectively review their concerns and the homeowner's application without having some sort of scope as to what it is, without falling on the 2,500 square feet disturbance requirements that the county has? And I'll let the DRB answer that.
And 2,500 square feet, just so people know, that's not a one-car garage. Okay? That is when you think about it, it's 10 by 25. It is a very, very small area.
It's 100 by 25.
100 by 25, thanks.
Which is,
thanks for helping with that. But all I'm saying is, it is a small area. We actually figured it out long ago and far away when that standard, it used to be 10,000 square feet in 1988, and it went down to 5,000 and then down to 2,500. When we actually figured out, because it's not just the footprint of the building, it's the spoils pile, it's where you put the lumber, it's where you park the bobcat. And when you factor in those elements, you're getting into a really tiny little area before you trip to 2,500 square feet.
Mr. Wood, so, in my practice, I have 5 or 6 active clients at Reston, right? Where I deal with the 2,500 square feet, and it is a, how should I put it? It is a limit that I go right up to because I want to avoid that trigger with the county. However, I can still do a very large redevelopment of a property on a lot that our lots are very unique in the county, where we have, like, I would say my neighborhood as an example, we have lots that are around 8,000 square feet. That's all the lots are. So 8,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet, that's over 30% of the lot. And it's actually it actually can cause a huge impact. And I personally know because I did it to my own house. And I'm just being honest. I avoided the site plan requirements with the county because I was under the 2,500 square feet. But I improved my house and I made it bigger than what was there before. And I was within all of the guidelines. I went through all the procedures of it all. And, I like to think it came out nicely. But
no doubt,
there's lots of neighbors who also want to do the same thing. And I think you can make a big impact with such, even staying under that limit. And I think, I'm not a proponent of this guideline personally. I think Emily on our board was the biggest proponent of it from the landscape side of things, because what it does is when people do trigger a certain amount of square footage, what it happens is it ancillarily kills trees that are outside of that scope of work, that are not quote unquote being impacted, and then they die a year and a half, 2 years later because the roots were trimmed, whatever. So, so I think, I don't know if she's wanting to maybe, make a stricter impact. I think what right now for our redevelopment guidelines that we have for houses in general, and even our commercial guidelines, which I think we're gonna get to at some point in the meeting, is that we don't have any, right? Our guidelines are about 5 sentences that say, basically you can kind of do whatever you want, but you need to come to us before, which is kind of what, the PRC zoning says for any project in Reston right now also, is like, there's really no height or mass limit either. You kind of have to present to what you want to zoning and then see what they say kind of thing, right? And so it's very similar in that process, and I think all she's trying to do is maybe try to, help limit some of the massive kind of redevelopments that we see happening in Vienna and in parts of Herndon, parts of Falls Church, things like that, where people come in, they level the house, or they quote unquote are only doing additions, but they take it down to the foundation. And then they're rechanging the whole kind of aspect of the architecture, and I think she just wants to have a little bit more control.
So we're not getting mini mansions on tiny lots.
Right, and I don't know, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. I think houses are changing on how the needs are, and I think you can make a bunch of small additions that make the house, be more functional. But it does change the impact of the nature of the style of the architecture of the house, whatever it be. And all we're trying to do is maybe, go and say, I'm not in favor of adding additional, restrictions personally, because it would affect me on a daily basis. But, I think that's where she's going with it. And that, because you can come to my house and you can see, you can look at my neighbor's house and look at my house, and you can see the difference, night and day. So.
And to add to that, I think we were trying to be proactive and that learning from adjacent, neighborhoods and things like that. And maybe it's not an issue now because we have seen like one-off lots where they've demolished the house and put up a very large house. And I guess what she's thinking ahead to like, well, what happens if the neighbor does it? What happens if all of a sudden the whole cul-de-sac does it? And then it does change the character of our neighborhoods and losing the green space and the trees and things like that. So I don't know if I'm necessarily in favor of it, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to study before we turn it to.
Can I ask a question on that?
Please.
If let's say what you're saying, like worst case scenario, a whole neighborhood ends up doing that, right? Because they all want what the Joneses have or what Mike has. And does that then also affect the stormwater runoff in that neighborhood because now you have clearly diminished the landscape?
Yeah, it clearly does, even if the person who puts in a 200 square foot patio in their backyard, like every little bit adds up, right? So of course the answer would be yes.
Which of course affects our lakes.
Of course, but with that said, I think there's always going to be that issue because there's people who put in patios all the time who we don't calculate where that water goes. It's just you've just put in a huge piece of impervious area that now is going to do it. People enlarge their driveways. People
got a neighbor right now putting in a lot of.
We're dealing.
Concrete.
Come to our board meeting next Tuesday, and you will see a case that's coming before us that has a lot of concrete in the backyard. Let's just put it that way. And you can come watch what impact that's doing to stormwater. It clearly has one. We can't calculate it though. That it doesn't even engineer to fully calculate what that's doing. And so that's why we're not trying to kind of get to that level. I think we just want to have a little bit more in our single family detached redevelopment guidelines that basically would have a little bit of per se on maybe that environmental impact, which I think mainly Emily's concern is the large trees that are outside the footprint having a little bit more of a requirement, whether it be a tree save area or requiring an arborist to do pruning of roots or something that helps protect the trees that are maybe not being impacted on paper, but in reality are being impacted down the road. That's her biggest concern.
So I want to react to the whole, I mean, not, discuss something about what is requested from the homeowners and how much is the cost is okay, right? So it depends on what they're trying to do also. So some people just cut, I don't know, they come in 20 trees, they cut 20 trees from their backyard with no approval, nothing in the front yard, and then pave the entire backyard with concrete, which is more than probably 2,500 square feet, the way they paved it and steps and all that. And then not only that, enlarge the driveway that actually touches the trees and the roots and just kind of like push the dirt, because we can see the pictures of bobcats. That guy has to come in and pay $17,000 maybe, for a civil engineering plan because he's done all the work. Now he has to have a professional to tell him how to remedy this situation. But in terms of some of the applications that come into us, it's very confusing. I can see the staff has written weeks of emails back and forth requesting information and they can't produce it, and it's confusing. And a plat or a little title surveyor's little diagram of drawing is a way to do it. So now, do we give the neighbors a better location, or does Fairfax County have a bit, like in DC, I work primarily in DC and I can produce a plat pretty easily and make dimensions out of the drawings, but do we have such a link that we can give them, hey, you can get a plat from the county easily by this, or, look at your deed documents, maybe you have it there, and make some adjustments. So those kinds of things could be helpful so that they don't have to go pay someone, a surveyor, to survey the entire property.
County won't do that for you.
There's plats, they have plats, they have all the plats.
But they won't draw the.
No, they're not gonna draw, I'm not
She's
suggesting
just
they
saying
should
getting the
draw.
plats easily, so that someone else can do it.
You're still gonna have to engage, if you're gonna do this, they're gonna have to engage a civil engineer, and whether it's 5,000, 10,000, or 17,000, that was the quote this morning. I don't care, they're not gonna do it. It's still an expense to the homeowner to come up with this. If they go past the 2,500 square foot requirement, the county code compliance will cite them. And they'll have to go get an E&S plan done, and they'll also have to they'll have to do some kind of stormwater mitigation. There'll be a requirement for a rain garden or something like that.
Dry well.
So how does it trigger in the county?
Excuse me?
2,500.
No, but meaning like someone report, like.
Yeah, someone reports it.
Someone reports it, okay.
Yeah.
Or it comes little by little, It comes little by little, just to pave the backyard, cut 10 trees, cut 10 more trees in the front, do this, it goes over like a year period, these kinds of jobs that people attack the property, hey, I'm gonna do these things, and there's 17 different applications about one tree here, and it becomes untrackable. Sometimes there's no even
So potentially
application.
they're getting away with it then?
They're not getting away, we're trying to not get away.
I understand, but
One at a
current,
time, please, and let's be mindful of the fact that there are people online who want to participate as well. Mr. Piggins?
You're on mute, William.
Okay, Fairfax County actually has a very easily find, because I just simply found it by doing a simple search, related to residential paving and yard coverage, and they give for each district sizes, R1, R2, R3, R4, the maximum percentage allowed.
that's great, but my question comes back to, if it's not being triggered, it doesn't matter. Right? Just like us, when people do stuff.
Well, it's a code compliance issue, and if you're found liable for a code compliance issue, you're going to have to fix it. That's it. Done deal.
Complaint driven.
Correct.
Somebody has to file a complaint.
So I can, not wrong.
Cam, I am concerned that we are diving down.
We're going down a rabbit hole a little bit.
So, pull us out of this.
All right, so I guess what I'm hearing is essentially, sharing concerns to the DRB as we discuss that design guideline in particular. We can keep those thoughts in mind as we craft specifics if we want to narrow our focus from what the county has as requirements. And then, of course, while I think the DRB's perspective is always going to be that, they're conscious to an extent of the financial burden that some of the requirements of an application are made, some of them are required. And that is something that I think the DRB does consider when they discuss applications. So switching mode from design review board to covenants. We have several resolutions that we have pulled that are our top priorities as we go through our use and maintenance resolutions. I want to briefly mention them, and then if anyone has any specifics, I think that would be a great opportunity to dive in. So use and maintenance standards are essentially all of the 16 standards that the Covenants Committee reviews and hears any alleged violations that are against the protective covenants. And so our vegetation resolution, our refusing debris resolution, our vehicles resolution, and very lightly boats as mentioned. I'll just comment on boats very quickly because we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of boats, but we do think that there is a need to clean up that resolution that aligns with the common area rules and regulations, resolution 2 about lake access, lake use and access. They are two documents that should be aligned with one another, and they are competing with one another right now. So with vegetation, I think Karen mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of subjectivity in what does attractive manner mean. You're talking about your yard. And incorporating invasive ivy requirements. We have taken positions on what does that mean. As we all know, there's invasives everywhere throughout Reston. And so we've kind of come up with a scale and a barometer and what our foundation is, which is post 2006, when the deed was updated and the requirement for our invasive policies was implemented. But we need to make sure that that's memorialized in the resolution. Clarify what detrimental impact to the general versus claimant's property. That's just a nuance of language, I believe. We need to address dead trees. Should the association look at whether or not if we receive a complaint or there's a dead tree on a property that if it's summertime and clearly there's no leaves growing, what do we do about that? Do we do nothing, which is what we currently do?
They're good for nature.
In a front yard, a single tree dead? I'm not sure. And so that's one of the things that, as an association, the Covenants Committee needs to come up with recommendations for the board to consider as we talk about what detrimental impacts those things are and what should be included as something that's reviewable by the Covenants Committee. And then defining what reasonable time is. I know that there is a lot of conversation about repeat offenders. We've talked about that at nauseam, probably.
Well, I was gonna.
It's a good thing Rob isn't here.
I was gonna ask, is there consideration to put language in here that better defines a natural state for yards? Like, is there some kind of guideline out there in general that could be used to help define it within
Guidelines
Reston?
are pretty good on that, actually.
The design guidelines are, but the resolution doesn't really speak to it. So,
Right.
yes.
So, but that's what I'm like, maybe we can clean that piece up, which might be more helpful in those types of things.
Sure.
Maybe.
Probably not, but we can at least try.
But I think that that's exactly what we're trying to hear
Yeah.
from the board, right? Is what do you want the Covenants Committee to be considering while they're having those discussions when they're talking about the revisions to the use and maintenance standards? So yes, I think that that's a great.
Well, and I do think it's important, I have some natural yards in my neighborhood that nobody complains about, and yet we all know that there's other natural ones that are complained about, so I think if we had maybe a better understanding in general of what that was, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially since there's different viewpoints about things
Correct.
like that. But I think going back to the general point of what do you do when the same complaint comes back to you, whatever it is, year after year after year? What can we incorporate into the process to deal with that? It doesn't, we don't see it a lot, but.
But we do see it in our
We do see
here.
it at specific extent, especially, no names, but cases where there's a problem, it comes to the legal committee, it's fixed, and it shows up again the next year. It's fixed, and it shows up again. And it's fixed, and it shows up again. Same problem.
So.
We had one come before the Covenants Committee. I won't mention any names or anything like that, but basically it's one of those that keeps rolling around every year because what happens is that, in the fall, they go and cut it down. And not in violation anymore. Looks a little weird because it's barren, but not in violation anymore. So dismissed. Because this happened year after year now. One time, they managed to not cut it down appropriately because it got caught early enough that the delays to get it before the committee, it arrived in violation. But still, the solution was they cut it down.
Pause for a moment, please.
It's the advice of counsel that we stray from getting any more specific on this matter.
I appreciate that. Yeah, for everyone in the room who may not have heard, we're gonna, we understand the situation, and I think we should probably leave it as read at this point.
So I think the consensus is that there is an item that we need to tackle when we talk about repeat offenders. I think the consensus is there. Council and I have discussed it. We believe we have an option that will get us closer to navigating through that process. And so the Covenants Committee will hear that at some point when they bring this back up, and hopefully, since this is on their priority list for this year, the board will see it at some point this year as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I also just want to add that the Environmental Advisory Committee is working on a natural lawns design guide. But to bring that to the board to say, hey, we can develop this into a design guide. There's actually a subcommittee of which I'm sort of a casual member to it, but that is actually working on that specific topic.
I'd suggest that Environmental Advisory Committee coordinate with Covenants so your work can inform what they're doing.
Yeah, I'll inform. I'll let them know. Great, sure.
Thank you.
And this is Director Molyneux again. I just want to jump in and add my voice to the consensus that we need to address this issue. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off at vegetation.
So the next resolution was refuse and debris. I think from my perspective as staff, going to Covenants and going to legal, I think the board has some comments on exposed to view when we talk about enclosed yards and what type of consideration those types of violations should have if it's exposed to view and visible from up above, or you can only see the violation if you look over the fence. I think the Covenants Committee needs to hear some of those perspectives from the board so that they can mull that over as they discuss any changes to the resolution, particularly if they think that exposed to view needs a better or clearer definition.
Okay. Mr. President, on that, it seems to me, at least as a cluster president and my board, it's most concerned with curb appeal. So if it can be seen from our cluster, even though it's a private road, if it can be seen from the private road, we need to enforce it. I'm not quite so sure that we need to get involved in looking over fences from one neighbor to the other. I don't know that doesn't get us. We don't want our covenants to be used by one neighbor to beat up on another neighbor, right? And so if it has a community impact, so if it has an impact on a cluster, the marketability of a cluster, now we're talking about property values. So things that can be seen from either a public road or a road in which the public has a right to travel, which would be most of our cluster roads, right? Even though that's private, that seems to me would be an area where we would want to emphasize enforcement, not so much looking over neighbors' fences. My perspective.
I tend to agree with that. The resolution talks about, views from upper decks and upper windows and things like that. As I've said before in committee, I don't think we should be in the position of having to police what people put in their enclosed backyards. So I think we have to be careful with that. I mean, there may be exceptions to that, but, if we're talking about our purpose being curb appeal and property values and things like that, I think that's a little overboard.
I had a neighbor ask me the other day, I think jokingly, if RA would frown upon somebody building a tunnel system, much like the lady did in Herndon. And I said, probably. I would check with DRB. But
it's below the ground, we can't say anything.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Very nice. If it's not the answer I expected, but I'm very excited.
We can't see it, we can't adjudicate on it, right?
Awesome. So that might happen in our neighborhood, Karen, and I apologize in advance. Cam, you want to help us move along?
Yes, so vehicles, very likely, we should add recreational vehicles in our definitions of vehicles. I think that's a misnomer. And then talking about enforceability on electric bikes, scooters, things on our pathways. I think that's the thing that keeps coming up. We also talk about, I actually recently had a question of, do we allow horses on our pathways? And the answer is no, we only allow them on bridle paths, which we do not have. So, exactly right.
Snake Den or whatever the trail is, that goes to Lake Fairfax Park. I believe it's called Snake Den. What's the name of that trail?
Yeah.
It's like a gravel trail. Yeah. I think that would be considered a bridle path. I could be wrong.
Very interesting, but not on our pathways, right? And so that's something that we do think needs to be addressed, and the enforceability part needs to be very clear what we're expecting members to follow and do.
Particularly with the electric scooters, my concern isn't so much, folks on e-bikes or hoverboards or whatever. My concern is accessibility vehicles. How do we, how do we classify those?
Correct. And then we already talked about repeat offender type of issues with some resolution number 5, which is the Covenants Committee and Administration and Operations. But were there any additional or alternative types of things that you all, as a board, or even the design review board, have that the Covenants Committee should consider when it comes to using these standards? Sounds like we've got our priority list.
Yeah, I don't hear anything. I think we're good to go. Let's move on to member experience and satisfaction.
We hit a little bit on this already. As staff, we are always curious in terms of what feedback members are giving to board members, DRB members, Covenants Committee members as they navigate through the process. You all have some small windows of interaction with those members, but we deal with them quite often in terms of, they're not happy with this decision that the DRB made. Well, that's where staff comes in. They're not happy with the decision that Covenants Committee made, or the vice versa. They're happy with the decision that the DRB or the Covenants Committee made. So we're just looking for, is there any opportunities for improvement? Is there word on the street that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing? And what does that look like moving forward? So open to any comments.
Look here.
The only thing I would say, I do apologize, I'm gonna have to leave, but I'm gonna join remotely. I gotta drive to Pennsylvania tonight. On a member experience, I would say the big one that I get feedback on is the whole letter situation and how we make a decision at a meeting, then it takes a week to get the letter, then the letter date, they have to wait another week before, just in case there's an appeal. And then if there is an appeal, there could have been an appeal submitted to RA, but the applicant may not be notified within that 7-day window. It could come a couple days later, even though the appeal came in, because if they submitted on day 7, you guys can't get it right out the door to the applicant. So it's this waiting period that I think people are very confused about. And I'm going through a case right now that's dealing with this, and frankly it's confusing even for me as I'm actually the applicant in the case, and it's been a little confusing at that timeline situation and how to clearer show people kind of truly when their project is approved, I think would be, that's my feedback that I've gotten on a couple cases, so that'd be my only.
Yeah, at some point, I think some time ago, we talked about digitizing or using the web platform that we have to let members, applicants, see the status of, which gets really into some workflow things, but I don't want to get into that rabbit hole, but if we can if you guys can kind of think about how we can implement something like that to help somebody like an applicant to basically see, hey, what's the status of my application? Oh, they made a decision, what's that decision? Something like that to cut down the time that you just mentioned. I think that would be very useful.
Or if not to cut down the time, at least at least to illuminate the black hole.
Yeah.
So they don't feel like, their request is just out there, it's just sitting.
Yeah.
Like they know where they stand in the process.
Yeah.
Sure. Mr. President, it seems to me, and the county does this in their decision letters, it seems to me that we could put a paragraph in the decision letter that says there's an appeal period and you're free to proceed, unless there's an appeal, you would be free to proceed on X date with your improvement, with the approved improvement, but easy for me to say. I think that might address the concern you have if we added that paragraph as a standard paragraph in a decision letter that lays out,
Because we have something similar to that right now, but it basically just says from 7 days or 7 business days from the date of the decision letter, they can receive an appeal. But the issue is that there's almost this couple window of time, like if they get it on the 7th business day at 4:58, and they don't then notify the applicant right away, there could be a 2 or 3 day window of time where me as the applicant or the applicant that applied, right, could think, oh, my project is approved. Let's say it's a fence, they might have the fence company come in and put it in, and they get a letter, and then say, oh, this thing has been appealed, and now my fence is already up.
I think John's point, or Director Farrell's point, is to add a buffer of.
Right, so maybe that's a buffer you guys need to decide. What, do you guys need 3 days? Do you need an additional 5 days? I'm just trying to shorten.
Well, I'm going further than that. I'm saying put in the date, not 5, 4, 3, and 9, and wait a second, let me get out my calculator.
Right.
Put the date in.
Yep.
And that way it avoids that confusion.
Yeah.
So does emailing the staff to confirm if we have received an appeal also be?
Well, and you could say that in that paragraph too.
Totally. But to your point, Director McCarr, I think we are always looking to evaluate whether or not the website will do what we need it to do. And
We can send them out to the moon.
Exactly. So any other feedback for us?
I think the survey that you give applicants at the back end of the process is excellent.
I'll be online.
I'm glad we're doing that to get that feedback. Now, a lot of people aren't going to bother, but silence is acquiescence is the old Latin phrase. And if they ain't complaining, then you're doing a good job.
It sounds like a yard sign.
You gotta follow the guidelines for the sunset.
As long as we're not voting for it, it's silence and fine.
Kim, I think the only thing that I hear, I think people learn, I'm on the DRB, there still seems like there's some confusion on like, where do I start with, I wanna paint my house, or I wanna, what the case might be. And this is for like kind of long established residents. So, and I think you all have done a good job with this, I know where to look, but I think maybe most members don't know where to find that information probably on the website, or that they can find that information on the website. I know it's there, but I just wonder if there's a way to publicize it when people pay their assessments each year, or whatever the case may be, at different points, and especially when it comes to like maybe not so much the design guidelines, which could be easier to find, but like the cluster flip books, for example. Like we have so many meetings where like people are like, oh, I didn't know that was there, how do I get to that? Or we get confused with that too. So I don't know if there's a way to like idiot proof that more. And it would just because I feel like they're there, you just have to find them. So.
Could we do like a series of informational videos and put them on the website?
I thought you guys were getting tired of seeing my face already, but sure.
Well, it doesn't have
Never. You've got
You make the president do it.
I was going to suggest that we've got a fantastic theatrically trained.
I I was not volunteering. I'm perfectly happy to see Sam says. But I don't know, I mean, maybe that would be easier than people looking for, and I don't know how many Rest in Today videos have been done on this topic, but maybe if there were just a series of them on the website, it would be easier for people to find.
And if you tell me this is on there, I will slap my own hand, okay? Do we have a flow chart, like, that says you start at A and then you yes here, no there, it's on the website, I can find it?
I believe so. Don't quote me.
Okay.
I feel like you would send me an email if it wasn't.
Well, and I said, if it's there and I haven't found it, I'll slap my own hand.
Our
But-
DRB secretary has created those flow charts.
Well, I think maybe if we could make those things also more accessible, to your point, Brian, maybe that would help people to like go, oh, okay, like if I start here, I then go there. And the flowcharts can have live links in them that take you to the page with the covenants, your staff.
Absolutely.
I know they have fancy titles. I don't know what the fancy titles are at the moment. But, you know, I think that anything we can do to, like Brian said, just make it very easy to find, I think would be beneficial. And I know sometimes for some people it's like, oh, I have that, I can start here, versus, oh, I already know I have to start here, and then you can just easily find it. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other?
I have a question. Sure. So I don't know how this, you know, people do whatever they want to do and then come back because someone complains. That whole conversation about, you know, they put a deck up or this and that, and then we review weekly on stuff that has been done and try to remedy, you know, do this, do that kind of thing. Is there a punitive action or any penalty for someone that is not following the direction? And what is the categories of that? Like, you know, you do what, cut a tree, it's $5,000. I mean, I don't know, $100. You know, I don't know what they are.
No, technically. So
it's free for all kind of thing.
So the deed actually prescribes that the association cannot charge a member to review an application, essentially. So the punitive action would then be if they're non-compliant with the request from the association. So if they removed a tree, the action is that you need to submit an application. The minute they submit the application, they technically complied, right? And so there is no punitive action once they do that. So they submit the application, they get an approval for whatever, or the DRB says, yes, you can remove, the tree can stay, remove, you don't need to replace it, great, close. Or the DRB's decision is, you gotta replace a tree within 6 months. Then that follow-up action from staff in terms of we revisit the property 6 months to see if they planted the tree. If they don't plant the tree, then it goes through a different type of enforcement process. But there's no direct, you've done this, you get charged $5,000. You've done this, you get charged $1. There's no.
So the question then at the same time becomes for the, you know, some of these items, why are we even reviewing these things when people are doing whatever they're wanting to do in most, like, people, because the question to you was, do people not submit an application and do it? Yes, there's a lot of those because the application for the sale of the property comes in front of us because it just doesn't comply. And then you're struggling how to make it comply, it's because the person hasn't complied with it in the beginning.
Sure. My number one comment that I get from members is that I talked to my neighbor, and my neighbor said, oh, you're submitting an application for X. I wouldn't even bother doing that. And they don't. And so they don't because they don't like the process, they don't like the design guideline, or they feel like it's too overwhelming of a process to go through. So don't even bother doing it, which to me is what the problem, the source of the problem is.
Yeah.
The guideline needs to be looked at. The process needs to be evaluated. Do you really want the person to go to their 3 neighbors to change the color of their front door? I don't know. That's for you all to decide, right? But ultimately, that's one of the things that, like, okay, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to paint my front door because Joe down the street has the same color, and he didn't submit an application either.
and they don't get pinged for 20 years, and then when they sell, they're selling, so they don't.
I mean, the colors and all that, you know, that's something that's easily fixable things also, but environmental impact of things, you know, paving and removing the 20 trees in your front yard because you didn't like them, they were shedding too much, those are impactful things to your runoff, your water, and a lot of people, you know, doing it. So is a concern, is there like big impactful things, is there any consideration that, you know, anybody gets charged with those? And
I mean, there's things that
I'm
these
gonna pause for a moment. Is this germane to the conversation of member satisfaction, like our member satisfaction?
No.
I would not believe so.
Okay, I'm gonna pause this, and maybe you guys can take this offline.
I will share with you an example afterwards.
But happy to talk offline, it's a really good topic.
Cool.
So I think we're done with member satisfaction, member experience, and received the information. I'm going to lump future projects and future annual collaborations together.
Good.
And give us some time to talk about what does the association want the DRB to know, or the Covenants Committee to know, about the development that's happening in and around the association, and what are the maybe 2 or 3 top priorities that you want those groups to consider when they are reviewing applications that may come up for those items. So when we talk about redevelopment, we're talking about Reston Town Center North.
Okay.
We can go as far in detail as you want or not, but I think to me the design review board, as Mr. Wood mentioned earlier, the redevelopment guideline is pretty broad. There is no prescription in terms of what is and what is not allowed. And so it's really up to the DRB to review those projects with a certain level of reasonableness. There are some guidelines from the TSA for Reston Town Center North specifically, but if you've consulted those are also very broad. And so is there an opportunity for, as an example, if there's a position that the board has taken on something, how does that information get sent to the DRB?
So,
Good.
this is complicated. Because unless they join RA, there's not a whole lot for the DRB to do. Except there have been cases where the developer agreed to consult with the DRB. In my head, I've got Isaac Newton Square, there may be others. And there was a conversation that the applicant tells me was productive. The DRB people tell me was productive at Isaac Newton Square, that first building. And so it was a conversation about massing, it was a conversation about, but there weren't guidelines necessarily because DRB didn't have any jurisdiction. I think it's a different conversation when you're talking about Reston Town Center North because it is covenanted land. We don't, as far as I know, have covenants on strike that, design guidelines, as I went looking, on commercial property.
We do.
But they're kind of.
That's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
I understand, but the question is what could you contemplate a more specific set of guidelines doing or being? Because it seems to me that, for instance, the guidelines in our convenience centers would be very different from the guidelines at Reston Town Center North. Because the convenience center, fundamentally our convenience centers are 2 stories, you know, and Town Center North, we know based on what I'm reading the proffers, we're probably going to have 5- and 7-story buildings there. And to what degree do we feel like we need the board or the covenant staff to believe we need to develop more specific guidelines for Town Center North? Because other than Town Center North, I don't know that we're going to have multi-story buildings that become part of RA, at least as long as this supervisor's around. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm going, okay, what would be the specifics? And I need some guidance from you as to what those specifics would be.
Sure. I wouldn't just isolate it to design guidelines. I think that there's also an approach of making sure that the design review board and the RA board are aligned in their positions on certain things or communicating positions on certain things. And also to your point with convenience centers and signage, we've seen concern from board members related to what signage for commercial units are being approved. And while that's a very minute part of our process, when we talk about what's going to happen at Reston Town Center, there's going to be retail, there's going to be commercial on those parcels. And so what does the association want the DRB to consider when we're talking about the future of that development or any development? We've seen, St. John's was on the table. What should the board have expressed to the DRB in those conversations? I'm sure it happened, I wasn't here for it, but it could happen. And so how do we proactively engage each group together to make sure that we're aligned on those things? I wouldn't say I have anything very specific in terms of the guidelines. I think massing is a #1 priority in terms of what perspective the design review board has. And so there's a lack of comfortability with looking at 7 or 8 parcels without having some sort of examples of what's going to be around those parcels. Is that something that the board needs to know as you all are having conversations about maybe taking on the maintenance of the central green? I think that's something that should be discussed and shared as the DRB is considering all of these aspects of the application when it comes through. And I don't think that we'll see Reston Town Center North for a little while from the DRB's perspective, but I do think that there is worthy of making sure there's alignment between the two groups.
It seems to me that this is something that we can't resolve right now.
Correct.
This is something that, it requires a lot of thinking, getting the right people, maybe workshop it, or if you will, subcommittee or working group or something to that effect. Identify some things that you can recommend, and then we can kind of, with the expertise that sits on this board, do the intersection and see what makes sense. And plus, I think we still have time, as you mentioned. So I would suggest, let's not rush this, but let's just plant the seed, which you have done. I would suggest maybe think about a working group of some sort and then come back to it.
Which goes directly to future collaboration with Director Barr. Yes, you're nailing it.
Can I just quickly point out that I think, I just want to take a moment to say, I think DRB did a good job on the St. John's Woods change of signs. Because when they came back, they originally wanted, aluminum and bright colors and, I think the DRB did it right. I think you guys kept going back and having discussions and saying, look, it's got to be more in line with Reston, with the natural, with the, what we've been seeing. And so I know that I give DRB a hard time sometimes, but I really do love you guys and I think you do good work. And I think that was a great example of really focusing on, let's make sure that we're in line with the history and the standpoint of what Reston has been and continues to be.
They did a similar, just so you know, they did a similar good work on the Lerner Apartments on Cold Next Road. Lerner came in with a proposal that had nothing to do.
Yeah.
It was their company standard, had nothing to do with the aesthetics of Reston. And I think y'all did a good job of working that through and getting them to move in our direction.
Well, and I think DRB can be very clear, we're not looking for a JW Marriott sign.
If I may say something here, is that being on the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee, one of the first things we always ask any of the developers that are doing anything here, we get to see every one of the projects that wants to do anything, including later modifications. And we usually see them before it goes to Fairfax Planning Commission, and they follow our advice a lot. I can't say all the time, but they stay pretty close with us. The actual commissioner for the Reston area on the Fairfax Planning Commission always attends the RPZ meetings, Reston Planning and Zoning. One of the things that we always ask up front in writing as well as verbally at the meetings is, are you talking to Reston Association and the DRB? 90% of the responses are no. And we have no intention of doing that. So I know in a lot of cases, in some situations, Reston, the groups from Reston are going out to them independently as opposed to waiting for them to come. It's an optional thing and they're not really required to, especially if in all cases we're talking about the special corridor for all the new development going up. But as to coordination, we've always wanted to try to coordinate as much as possible about what we know, what DRB and the board want to see happen. But everybody that's a member of the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee has to be a Reston resident. Most of us are strong architectural backgrounds or planning backgrounds. So we're a very tight group. I think there's something like 15 permanent members and 3 associate members to fill in to create a quorum if all the permanent members aren't there. But their meetings are always published. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. So, sorry, Cam, before we leave the RTC North, just burn into that. I will say that maybe there's a little bit of confusion in terms of the DRB, like where the jurisdiction lies, because we have seen them a couple times and had like informal discussions or presentations with them. And so since they're, reforming a neighborhood from scratch, we're not looking at like a specific building or whatever. I think a lot of questions come in of like, well, where do we stop and start? Because I think there's some decisions that they've come to us with recently that we really question in terms of what goes on each block and things like that. And it's kind of like, is that our decision? Can we even like
who's doing
discuss that?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean that's good. So I feel like there's some confusion.
The confusion that I think I raised that up in one of the meetings is that the location of the school specifically and several different locations of things, we don't know the jurisdiction is ours or whomever's, or if the planning commission actually reviewed it before us. That is what Cam's talking about, the unified consensus between Reston people when we review things. That's all. We don't know who reviewed it and who approved it.
So I think to Director Johnson's point, or Director McCarr actually, is.
And Cam, I'm going to interject.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to pause this whole RTCN thing, and I'm going to tell you why. There's a lot that's in flux, and we're not going to be able to give you any definitive answers. And what we're going to end up doing in here is just asking a ton of questions that are going to end up really frustrating us. I think what might be helpful, though, is if we maybe get somebody from Supervisor Alcorn's office, here for a meeting, and perhaps have a similar conversation, with members of the DRB to get some clarity, and if not clarity, at least get on the road to answers. But we're not going to have those answers here. So I'd like to.
It's not the question of this. It's how do we unify the rest of the member experience as well as how do we know what we're reviewing? The answers are not clear.
Yeah, and I understand. As far as RTCN goes, we're just not going to know here. So we need to get some information from external sources, like sources that don't lie here. And I know Pete and I have had a ton of meetings about this topic over the course of the last few months, and we're some of the same questions you're asking, and we're just not there. So in the interest of time and everything else, we're going to just see if we can't curtail this, and in the interest of getting you the answers, see if we can't schedule a meeting with somebody from Supervisor.
So Director McCarr made a great point. This is why the future collaborations between the DRB and the board are important. And so I think we have good takeaways and final thoughts on what the board has provided to us this evening for us to take away, what priorities we have, and staff will be collaborating with the design review board and the covenants committee on those things. And then ultimately, to the last bullet, future joint annual meetings. I think that that's something that sits with the board. And I think the DRB and the Covenants Committee are most certainly open to attending meetings in which maybe development is being talked about. Maybe you all have a group of gatherings that you all are thinking about the future of Reston and what that looks like. So I'll turn it back to Director Johnson.
We also should probably consider the working group idea that came up. 'Cause there are resolutions that need to be reviewed, and certainly not going to say that the board isn't, championing a bit to it, but we'd like to get everybody's, all the stakeholders to weigh in. So, I'd like to put together a working group that consists of a few members of the board, a few members of the DRB, some members of Covenants, under Cam's watchful eye, and, we got to go from there.
Would that include, Cam, looking at the no application list for DRB that Cam mentioned earlier? Because I think that's a really good thing to look at.
Because that's involves resolution there. Yep, so absolutely. So that is a homework assignment that I'm going to give to everyone. If you guys could go and, get maybe, let's just say 2 members from each of your board and committee and shoot them back to me, and we'll get 2 members of our board and put everybody together.
As someone who argued for this meeting for a long time, I certainly think an annual spring meeting would be beneficial, even if it's just to make sure we're all on the same page. That's my 2 cents.
And it could even be a report of the working group each year. So that kind of thing. So, yeah. Anything else, Cam, that you'd like us to discuss under item D on the agenda?
We've got our to-dos.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up briefly for new business. I'm looking at members of the board. I see Director Molnax went off mute. Sir.
Nothing that specifically comes to mind, although I'm trying to recall if we wanted to add something to the agenda for the 28th. I recall a conversation on it, but it's not coming to my mind, so oh well.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Sir.
You need to adjourn the committee of the whole before taking new business.
Okay, oh, thank you. I hereby adjourn the committee of the whole. Back to new business. That's right, I'll give it back to the president. Thank you, sir. All right, so I don't see any further new business of the board. I appreciate everyone who's taken the time to be out tonight. We've got some good assignments. I think this was a good start to conversation, and hopefully these conversations will continue offline. Thank you very much, and we adjourn.